everyone, it's Hannah and Jenny with 4AR People, and we're here to give you a roundup of AR Ledge Week 12.
So, we were off for week 11.
Yes, we were off for spring break. And this week, our theme is running on empty because that's what we are doing.
The legislature, too.
Yeah, the legislature, but me too. So let's get started. This week, big topic was prison expansion. Tim Griffin went on several rants. There was a press release. He also came to testify during committee. I think Jenny watched those. She can get more into that later, but I do want to kind of talk about the bill criminalizing trans people using restrooms because that did pass. However, it was amended. And that it basically gives trans people another layer of cover, if that makes sense. Instead of, a trans person walking into a restroom and then a child being there and they automatically are now breaking the law, it now specifies that there has to be some kind of like sexual gratification intent, which means that trans people can continue to use the restroom that they feel most comfortable in and that they feel safe in.
And that bill, Hannah, I watched the first half of that committee meeting, that committee meeting where they heard the trans bill. It was a special order of business and it started at like 10 a.m. And then they broke for recess for session and then they came back afterwards. And you watched the afternoon portion, I watched the morning portion, and it was like really heavily testimony against the bill. Like I think there were only 2 people total that spoke for the bill, and then the bulk, the everyone else spoke against it. And there was really great representation from trans people across the state that came to testify against this bill, parents of trans kids, spouses of trans people. And it was really awesome. Like I loved being in that committee meeting. And it was one of the first committee meetings where like, it didn't feel, I don't know. It just felt like good to be there and for people to be seen and heard. And didn't that have a lot to do with why the bill ultimately got amended? I think you were watching that second portion.
Yeah, I do. I really think that everyone's testimony played a huge part in that. Specifically, I think the people who spoke the most to the committee members were probably the parents, who came and, kept talking about how their kids are going to be criminals and how they don't feel comfortable sending their child into a restroom with, like, let's say a trans woman has to go into a male's bathroom now. I wouldn't feel comfortable sending my young child who identifies as a woman into a male's bathroom. And that was kind of the whole point. And then Nicole Clowney and Jim Gazaway, I think, really nailed it in at the end because they both requested that it get pulled for an amendment, and they did it, and they amended it same day. Same committee meeting, it was amended. So,
and the amendment says that, so the bill was so bad before because it basically, to your point, like if a trans person was using the restroom, of their choice in a public restroom, and it doesn't match their biological sex at birth, if a minor walks in or is present, they would automatically be breaking the law. They would automatically could be prosecuted for criminal behavior without doing anything criminal, but just existing as a human being in a public restroom, would criminalize their existence. It was so egregious. And what they amended it to was that someone actually has to be breaking the law and, either attempting to do something inappropriate with a minor in order for them to actually be doing something criminal, which was what should the standard of law should be, and what actually the standard of law is right now. There are already laws in place. And that was an argument from a lot of people who argued against the bill in committee, in both chambers, was like, hey, we already have laws that say that grown men cannot walk into a girls' changing room and harass young girls. Like So this is kind of duplicative in that sense. And I think it reminds me a lot of how the drag bill got amended, and gutted to where it was just kind of like a nothing burger, but they still passed it anyway, I guess, to like make a political statement. And so that's kind of what this feels like. It's like, okay, we're passing it so that Senator Payton can make his political statement. But really it doesn't have, I don't think, any additional teeth legally than what already exists on the books. And it's a really big win for Arkansans and trans people. And we're happy with the outcome of that. And I want to say thank you to my Representative Nicole Clowney. I also want to say thank you to one of my Justice of the Peace representatives in Washington County, Evelyn Rios Stafford, who also testified, and so did her husband. So Washington County did us right that day. And I just want to shout out to those folks who represent me in my state and county government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know, it's good. And I love that. I think it's one of the first moments this session, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's one of the first moments this session where we actually saw them listen to the people of Arkansas, or at least attempt to make right a wrong. And so I think
to be responsive in real time to public
right.
testimony. And that is how it's supposed to work. And it's so meaningful and empowering when that happens.
Yeah. And so I think that was great. And I wish that happened more often. Because that's proof that it can. That's proof that we can reach a compromise on some of these bills. Personally would not want them to pass regardless, but there are compromises to make them less bad and less targeted. And we can do it. We can do it. They just don't want to all the time. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, to pivot and to talk about a not great bill that honestly did not get much attention, but we want to bring to your attention because it's not great. There's this bill, House Bill 1534, and it has language in the title that suggests it's about school zone populations, but really what it does is it removes the Voting Rights Act requirement, the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965 that requires 10% of a district, either a municipality or a school district or whatever, when you're forming these zones, to create districts for representation in elected government, you have to take into account minority populations, and there's a threshold. And if you are above that threshold, then it's required that 10% of those elected positions, or depending on what the race is and the zoning is, there's this 10% requirement that ensures 10% of minority representation within that district or zone. And this removes that from public school board districts. So essentially, school boards that have had requirements to ensure that there is Black and brown minority representation on their school boards, this bill wipes that out. And it's a very big deal. It's basically cutting the knees off of, these standards for equity in our schools, and giving appropriate representation to minority populations in these communities on the school board. And that's a really big deal. And I think that when you consider this bill in the context of LEARN's passing and the potential threat to public schools and to schools that might already be struggling or failing or have lower, grades with the state, and could be in trouble of either being consolidated or taken over by a charter school or by the state itself, this becomes even more problematic, because then those parents and individuals may not have appropriate representation at their local school board level. I think it also could play into this, the library banning bill that, if you have a cause of action as a parent to, to say, I don't want this obscene material in my kid's library, and that teacher or that librarian has to go before their school board to get adjudicated. Like if that school board does not appropriately represent the population, that could be problematic too. So there's just a lot of broad implications in addition to just the really bad optics. And also it's gross. It's gross. Like there's no need to do that. So it's unfortunate. It passed the Senate and I believe it goes to the governor's desk. But that one kind of did not get much attention. So we just wanted to flag that for you.
So I'm going to go back to Monday. We're going to start at the beginning of the week for this one. I just kind of want to talk about some bad comments that I think were made and bad timing. So this is a bill we've talked about. It's the Go Woke, Go Broke bill, or one of the two. It divests money from banks, so on and so forth. We've talked about it a lot. But this is coming after, so Sunday here in Little Rock, there were 2 shootings. And then Monday, the day that this bill ran, there was another school shooting in Nashville, where three 9-year-olds,
Or yeah,
3 9-year-olds, and then 3 staff were shot and killed. And on that same day, Representative Wardlaw said to the House that we're going to stand up for the gun manufacturers because no one's doing that, which isn't true. Firstly, and secondly, I mean, why would you make a comment like that on a day like that? You know, it's all around bad. I think it was, I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, it's sad. It's hard. You know, the whole gun argument, it really bothers me to an extent that I don't know. It bothers a lot of people, but it just really bothers me that we're going to stand up for gun manufacturers and not for children and not for the people who live in our state, because we do have a lot of gun violence.
I'll add to that if people are wanting to know how they can become part of the solution from like a grassroots standpoint, we would recommend checking out Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. They are a frequent partner of ours in a lot of this grassroots organizing and advocacy work, and they do a really great job of just advocating for common sense, gun legislation at the state and local levels, in addition to the national level. And they, they have some really great programs and different things that you can do. They have networks of support for survivors of gun violence, if that's something you need support with. They also are not just moms. You don't have to be a mom. You don't have to be a female. You can be anyone and get involved with Moms Demand. And they are good, hardworking people who volunteer their time to educate folks about how we can make some of these laws a bit better. They have been integral in our state in helping stop some gun legislation that would have been really detrimental in the past. And we just recommend that if you are feeling like, what do I do now, to check them out. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know. I feel like I had something up here to say about it, and then I started talking about it and it all went away.
Because that's what this does to people. Like this is what sustained trauma and violence and gun violence does, not just to those directly impacted, but to our society as a whole.
Yep.
You don't have to live like this. It doesn't have to be this way.
We don't. I mean, no other country in the world does. So moving on. On that note, what's next?
FOIA.
FOIA. Oh yeah. So there were 2.
What is FOIA? Tell us what FOIA is first.
The Freedom of Information Act. And so basically that gives oh my God. I'm sorry, y'all. Look at my hair. Anyway, FOIA, it gives people the opportunity to request information from government officials or state agencies, documents typically. And we in Arkansas, we have some of the best FOIA laws in the nation. Like you can, I mean, we can get information when we need it, basically. Now there were two FOIA bills, two bad bills that kind of roll back some of the good parts, right? David Ray tried to pass one. I don't remember all of the specifics, but it failed, so it doesn't matter. Um, and the second one, Mary Bentley, and basically what she's trying to do is make it to where, I mean, going back to Conway specifically, because that's where she represents, she basically wants the school board or like the city council to be able to meet separately without giving notice to the public and without the public being able to access records of those meetings, which is not good. Like, why are we doing that? I don't know. But it passed the House, so it will be moving on to the Senate next week, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, there was like a funny part in her floor speech where she called not being able to meet privately as public officials as like communist, and I thought that was kind of funny because like communism is actually the opposite, like where you meet in secret.
Yeah.
Plot and scheme without public accountability or input. Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. Like there's that group that we talked about a few weeks ago, and I've already forgotten what it's called. Bless my heart. This like public account citizens for like an accountable Arkansas or something like that. We'll find it and we'll put it in the newsletter. And it's this great like bipartisan, nonpartisan effort, people kind of all across the political spectrum that fight and uphold our FOI laws, fight for and uphold them. And they've been a great, resource, I think, for the public for testifying against some of these bills. And they were really active early on and still have been. So I expect that we'll probably see some of these folks again when it heads to the Senate side next week. And hopefully the Senate shoots it down. If not, then we can maybe expect our quorum courts and our school boards and our city councils to just start hanging out off public record. What could go wrong?
Oh,
so much spoiler.
So much. Anywho,
well, we can talk about criminal justice now. So this was this was kind of what this week was about. Hannah mentioned a press conference that the governor had on Monday, that Attorney General Tim Griffin also attended, and he had some colorful, very Arkansan remarks to make about lawless, helmetless dirt bikers making noise in the Chick-fil-A parking lot. Which was kind of a really funny anecdote. It's not a funny subject. Like, we obviously know that Arkansas has a big problem with violent crime, as we just talked about. But like his anecdote for this like big criminal justice package was like people riding not street credible dirt bikes without helmets and making noise while he's trying to order his chicken sandwich. So anyway, fast forward, they talked a lot about at the press conference prison expansion. So there's going to be, something like 3,000 new beds that they want to build, which means a new prison. And that's going to cost the state, a pretty penny. And then we saw later in the week that the actual criminal justice legislation filed. And we want to point out that does not, the legislation that was filed and heard this week that passed out of the Senate, does not include the actual prison expansion. So there's nothing in that legislation that Senator Ben Gilmore and Representative Jimmy Gazaway filed. It just talks about reforming basically our parole system, and some sentencing things are in there. And then there's a chunk about recidivism, or ways to deter people becoming repeat offenders and keeping them out of prison after they're released. So before we talk about that, just a note that we heard from Senator Gilmore that the actual prison expansion will have to come from an appropriations request from the governor's office. And then that that appropriations legislation will be drafted by like the budget appropriations folks and then approved probably by ALC. So that will happen at a different time. So the chunk that we're talking about right now, again, just applies to revising our criminal code and how we process people with different crimes. And so the biggies we want to flag for you are, and Governor Sanders made a big deal about this at her press conference, is if you commit a violent crime within this certain category, you will have to serve 100% of your time. And I will admit, I don't know much about the criminal justice system. I'm not an attorney. A lot of this stuff is new for me as I'm learning about it. And when I heard that, I was like, that sounds great. Of course, you murder someone, you rape someone, you commit a terrible crime. Yes, you should serve 100% of your time. That sounds reasonable. That sounds appropriate. And I think that a lot of our Kansans hear that and they go, yes. And she said, some people might think this is too tough, but it's tough, but it's fair. And that's how we do things in Arkansas. And like that resonates, like that message, I think makes a lot of sense for people in this state. What I learned was that through the committee process and the Senate side is that the federal standard for a lot of these violent crimes is you serve up to 85%. And why they do that, why they give you that last 15% to perhaps get out of prison early is because they want to be able to incentivize you to have good behavior while you are incarcerated. So if you know that you're going to be serving 25 years and there is no chance that you can get out at like year 22, what incentive do you have to actually be a decent person, have decent behavior in prison population? And so that encourages people and incentivizes, that you work together and that you do all these things that are expected of you while you're serving your time. So that's a nugget that I did not have before this week. And that was helpful for me to see, like, it's not about just like being lenient. It's about creating these mechanisms for people who actually work with prisoners and for prison population. Like it makes sense. Another big thing that I learned this week is that 15%, if you get out early at that federal level and you don't serve 100% of your time and you're eligible for early release, you are monitored by the state or by the federal government. You have to check in with a parole officer. You have all of these guidelines that you have to adhere to. And if you serve 100% of your time up to the statute of limitation on your sentencing, you're released, and that's it. The state does not have to check in with you at all. So if you are thinking about committing another violent crime, there's actually no reason or requirement, or really the state cannot legally check in with that person. And so that creates this buffer time where you can check in with a formerly incarcerated person and like see, are they adjusting well? What services do they need? And to really prevent future crimes from being committed. And so those were two really eye-opening things for me. And that was some pushback that Senator Clark Tucker made, like, why are we doing this 100% thing? Because, and there's a whole bunch of statistics, like Arkansas already locks people up for the longest amount of time for any state, time served and not just, sentencing time. But in addition to that, like, there are these reasons why we have these things, and it's nuanced. And I think it's worth Arkansans leaning into those nuances and not just like making a blanket judgment about it and being like, well, yeah, that's what we should do. We also heard, and then there's these other categories, and those would be, these different percentage times, and you would be able to work towards early release. So that's one thing that was like flagged that's potentially problematic with this bill. Another thing that was flagged as potentially problematic is it classifies negligent homicide as a violent crime. So a negligent homicide an example would be you accidentally kill someone in a car crash. Your intent was not to kill someone. You didn't anticipate that. And that would put you in that 100% category where you're not eligible for early release. And the prosecutors who testified in support of the bill said that they actually did have a lot of heartburn about this one issue with negligent homicide. They said it wasn't enough to make them come out and not support the bill, but that is something that they don't like about it. So that is worth mentioning, in my opinion. Really, the rest of the bill is about kind of upending our parole system. They really wouldn't call it a parole system anymore. It kind of has this like less kind of gut reaction term to it, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. But essentially, you would, have these particular commissions and specialists who are ensuring that, best practices are being used to keep people from repeating an offense. It really does strengthen a lot of the programming and services that the state will provide to people who are exiting prison life and entering society, and, hopefully reducing those recidivism rates, which we also have pretty high rates of that in Arkansas. So really investing in that kind of like last lever to keep people from going back to prison. There's some prison programming that's also included that would be things like, parental classes. And there's a component in there about victims and expanding service animals for victims and victims' families. So it's pretty comprehensive. And I think in some ways similar to LEARNS, in that there's a lot of good in there. And maybe not some good. Now, one thing we would like to see, and I think this is something that, again, that I'm learning more and more about for people who are smarter than me and have worked on this issue a long time, is if we implement all of these things that are in this bill, I think Senator Tucker said this in committee, our violent crime rate would only go down 2%. So we're not actually getting at the heart of the violent crime issue in our state. And so that's a big question, I think, for citizens and residents to ask their lawmakers going forward is, okay, this is a good start. What is next? How are we actually going to get guns out of the hands of people who don't need them? How are we going to ensure that, kids have great after-school programming options in their communities? People have good jobs, all of these things that actually are proven to lower violent crime rates over time, because that is, we're going to need those things in addition to this. So anyway, criminal justice, it heads to the House, pass out the Senate and heads to the House. So, and the House Judiciary Committee I have a lot of respect for them. I think that they're a really solid committee and have been for a while. So I expect a lot of thoughtful questions and answers once it heads there next week.
I don't know what to say. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else is. I will say that I spent $30 to print this off at Kinko's because this is the criminal justice bill. I did not want a repeat of LEARNS where my printer died, and then I ended up spending like $60 on ink. That's a racket. Like, can we get Joe Biden, in addition to like getting rid of the junk fees for banks and stuff, can he lean into the racket of ink? It's cheaper to buy a new printer than it is to buy ink.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is so silly. I can just go out and buy another printer, but I don't want to do that. All that to say, Kinko's came through. It's double-sided, so I'm saving paper. It's got this little...
That's insane. It's so big. There's so much.
And the House bill sponsor of this, Representative Jimmy Gazaway, saw it, and he was like, I love that. I did think, and I was like, this is your bill, sir.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't even have a spiral. And I was like, it's because you did not pay $30 at Kinko's, at FedEx. Anyway.
On my level, Gazaway.
Do you want to talk about constitutional amendments?
Yeah, just real quick. I think this week, both the House and the Senate heard their constitutional amendments. They did not vote on them. So they typically how the process works is they give the members who have filed them an opportunity to come present them to the committee. And then after all of them have been presented, they will come back and vote on which ones they want. And they can refer up to 3 referendums to the or constitutional amendments to the ballot. And there's a several different ones this year. I feel like personally, I think the uh, judge bill, the one that's going to make our judges nonpartisan or partisan, which they are currently nonpartisan, but wants to make them partisan races. I feel like that has a good chance of coming out. I think that's on the House side. Um, and then there was another one. David Ray's trying to get in our way again.
Classic Representative Ray.
Classic Ray. We worked on a coalition against issue 2 last election cycle, and it would basically make it to where you have to get like 60% of the vote or something crazy to like get an amendment passed. Basically, they don't want like a 50.1% to win. And this one, it's interesting because he's making it to where the legislature has to have 2/3 of a vote to get the referendums passed. He said that that was a big issue, and that's why he thinks issue 2 did not pass last time, was because it was unfair to make the people of Arkansas have a vote of like 60% and not be the same for the legislature.
Which is hysterical because when the legislature passes bills, they need a 50% plus 1. Like, it's a simple majority. That is the structure of our democracy in a nutshell, is 50% plus 1. This is, again, like, the voters have overwhelmingly rejected these attempts by the legislature to make it harder for us as regular people to put issues on the ballot, because we don't like how they do things, and they don't like that. This is a tantrum. This is legislative constitutional amendment tantrum, kind of, put on paper for a ballot. It's like, we don't want you to be able to do this, so we're going to try to take this away and trick you. We're going to try to trick you too with our language. It's so silly, and voters have seen through it, and I think we'll continue to see through it. And like, again, we've said this before, Representative Ray, this is just kind of his shtick at this point. Like, he is going to be the guy. He's the guy to do this type of stuff. And we can expect this type of stuff from him every session.
Well, and I think it's funny too, because a lot, like, an argument that he makes a lot is, not every Arkansan votes, so it's not even like a majority of Arkansans.
Yeah, but are the people that vote, it's a majority.
Yeah, exactly.
There is a good, I don't know, like, Hannah explained this. We're hearing all of them. Often there's a front runner, or you can kind of hear a rumor from legislators, like, this is the favorite, or we're really excited about this one. It's kind of not like that this year, which is unusual. I'm not going to read into that at all. But so one way you can look and see if one has a potential to move on is by how many sponsors are on it. If it's just one person, it's probably not going to go very far. But if there's, 20 plus sponsors in both House and Senate, hey, that could have a chance of getting out. And there's one that has a bunch of sponsors from both parties, and it amends the Constitution. Slavery is banned in our Constitution, as is involuntary servitude, but there's an exception in our Constitution for crimes. You can require a punishment for a crime to include slavery. And so that's bananas. And this would amend the Constitution to revoke that exception, which I think is a decent constitutional amendment. And say it doesn't matter if someone is commits a crime, their punishment cannot be slavery or involuntary servitude.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think I had to go to another meeting and Vivian was presenting that, and so I only caught the first half of her presentation, but it was very well put together, and I am excited about that one. Really,
yeah, there are a lot of it's a ton of sponsors. It's a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans, and I hope that one gets referred. I think that would be just a great thing to do. And that has been a problem in Arkansas. It's not like that's a abstract part of the Constitution that's like not actually used, and we're just making a signal by revoking it, like that, people are actually punished and required to work and not get paid and to do that as punishment for their crime. So I hope that I hope that one gets out. I'm sure there are other great ones, but that's one that I personally like.
Yep, me too.
Quickly, a couple of things before we wrap up. This is not really legislative in nature, but the governor fired the Arkansas director of the higher education department kind of out of nowhere this week. There's an article in the DimGaz on it. We'll link it in our newsletter. And it was just kind of strange timing. And, you know, she was in the middle of running some legislation, I think, with maybe Senator English that would expand scholarship opportunities for secondary ed for students across the state. So that's kind of a head scratcher, that one right there, and could potentially signal that Governor Sanders is maybe gunning for higher ed. And could potentially defund some of those programs. So we just want to alert people to that. Also, we've got on here to mention that the governor also had another press release about lowering taxes, a big income tax break, and corporate tax break for folks, and that legislation will drop next week. Don't know if that is going to push us out from our sine die end date, which is supposed to be April 7th. But with the announcement of the tax legislation, I would imagine we would be in session a little bit longer. We still have not seen a resolution to extend session, but that could be coming. Mm-hmm. And then in neither here nor there, some things got wild in the Senate on Wednesday because Senator Jimmy Hickey made a motion to reinstate Senator Alan Clark's seniority. You'll probably recall that he had that ethics violation. He was found guilty by his colleagues. They revoked his seniority and his per diem and from that session. And then the revocation of his seniority extended on into this session. They voted for that. So he's like dead last on all the things. For being punitive and his frivolous complaint against his colleagues. And so there was a motion made to reinstate it, and then things kind of blew up a little bit.
They did. You know, Senator Flowers is not one to not speak her mind. Okay. You know, I mean, she's gone viral a few times too for stuff like this. And we appreciate it so much. And it was so fun to watch.
Yes. I would just a note, I was in judiciary waiting for them to come back to finish the criminal justice bill, and everyone, a member of the public and different state agencies staff, we all had our phones and laptops and iPads open listening to this happen in real time because it was so tense. It was so tense.
Yes. What was it? She ended with calling him a scoundrel.
Yeah.
It's time for a legislative rewind, and I can't wait for y'all to hear this one. This is Senator Stephanie Flowers speaking against a motion that would reinstate Senator Alan Clark's seniority. And if you don't remember, just as a quick refresher, his seniority was revoked over the summer, and the reason for that was because he had filed a retaliatory complaint against Senator Stephanie Flowers after he had received a complaint himself. The complaint filed against him was valid because he had lied about going to Boys State. He said he was somewhere he wasn't and still collected a paycheck for it. However, the complaint he brought against Senator Stephanie Flowers, well, that one was not valid. And because of those actions, the Senate decided to revoke his seniority for this session. Now that we're all caught up, let's listen to what Senator Stephanie Flowers had to say about this motion.
Y'all ought to be better than this. This is insanity. No partisanship should be about this. Nothing. Somebody takes money under false pretense, doesn't rank for that, and then goes about telling the whole state of Arkansas he's going to burn down the house, and brings a complaint against me, when the same situation that turned out to be how I received per diem by mistake based on staff clerical errors happened to another colleague who happened to be a doggone Republican, but nothing was brought against that person. And now you want to reinstate his rank? I'm totally opposed to this, and you ought to be too. You talk about fairness, talk about equality, non-discriminatory actions. What is this but that? I'm voting no, and I hope you'll have sense enough to do it too. But if you don't, it really tells me something about every last one of you sitting here. That you can take my rank for being an honest lawmaker, but give his back for being a doggone scoundrel.
Basically, she killed the motion to reinstate his seniority by going off.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
saying,
like, her points were all valid too. It wasn't just like she was yelling because he, did that to her. There were other things outside of that also played into it. And
I think we'll do a legislative rewind too, maybe. But I mean, I want to say just from an ethics standpoint, like ethics punishment, the consequences of doing something unethical in the state government should have teeth. Because we want to disincentivize unethical behavior. We want to discourage corruption. We want to encourage transparency. So like, what is a punishment if you're just gonna revoke it? That's kind of my opinion. And she did have some other factors playing into why she was upset too.
Anyway, thank you, Senator Flowers. Oh man.
Yes. Well, we are very sleepy over here. If we have messed something up, again, be kind, tell us, we will fix it, correct it. Hannah is a champion and has watched all of these incredibly late sessions and committee meetings that have gone into the wee hours of the evening. So send her a coffee, Venmo her some money for her coffee.
Please.
Hannah, drop your Cash App. No, I'm just here's my Cash App. Yeah, it's been rough. You should hug a legislator. But again, we don't sleep so that you can, and we are nearing the end, folks. We are nearing the end. So, and just as a neither here nor there, also another one is that there is no deadline to file to that where you have to like stop filing legislation. Like you can file up until the last second. It won't go anywhere, obviously, at some point in time. But Senator Greg Leding has a tweet thread about that, and there's a reason for it. It's not
in 2019, they removed the deadline because what was happening is a bunch of legislators there was just like a huge influx of bills on deadline day, and most of those bills were what we call shell bills. So it'll have like the purpose of this bill is XYZ, and it's like a one line, and it identifies this as a shell bill, whatever. And then what legislators will do is they will then amend it to like add everything that they want in it. It just gives them it's basically like holding their place.
Yeah. And a friend of mine who used to work at BLR, the Bureau of Legislative Research, they're the like the outfit office component that actually writes the legislation for the legislators. She used to work there, and she said it was so stressful because you would see this stack pile up and you would know like that is just work that's just staring us down, that we're gonna have to do this never ending stack that grows. So it's an effort to ease the workflow for the BLR staffers who do this work day in and day out and are public servant heroes, and that goes unsung and uncelebrated more often than not. So we want to say thank you to BLR staffers for their hard work and dedication
and having to put up with everyone and all of the things.
Yeah.
Doing last minute amendments and, all of that. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. Until next week.
Bye, everyone. I don't know why I did 2 hands, but it is what it is. Yeah. Thank you for watching and/or listening to our weekly roundup of the 94th General Assembly here in Arkansas. Be sure to head over to our website, 4arpeople.org, to sign up for our weekly newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and listen to our brand new podcast. Once again, we are 4AR People, and we're here to keep you up to date on all things Arkansas legislature.